Everybody, welcome early by 1 minute to our Instagram Live for today. We'll wait a couple minutes as people gear up, and I bring my dear friend Dr. Daniel Kraft into the mix here, who will be joining in just a second. All right, there he is. I see Daniel's request is here. Connecting by the power of magic. There you are.
It is magic. Incredible.
Hey, Daniel. You know, it's not too long ago, pal, that I remember, getting a 1 megabit per second connection was like just impossibility. It was something reserved for the biggest university connection lines. And anyway, here we are. We take this stuff for granted a lot of times, don't we?
It is. I mean, back when I met you when I was a medical student, we barely had email. I'm not sure how we, did projects, how we collaborated. It seems like the dark ages.
It was the dark ages. Yeah, the floppy disk and all of that. Anyway, Daniel, a pleasure. And I think everybody who's joined us here today knows a dear friend, compatriot, co-conspirator extraordinaire, Dr. Daniel Kraft. I first met Daniel through my first university. I had a chance to found International Space University, where Daniel was a student. And then when Ray and I created Singularity University, we were very lucky to recruit Daniel to be chair of our medicine track. So Daniel, a pleasure.
It's been an honor and pleasure to be on this crazy journey with you. I mean, yeah. What you do so well is bring amazing people together and catalyze them to do the benign conspiracy, as you call it.
Yes, yeah. The benign. By the way, just to give some energy to that idea, the benign conspiracy is something that I think is a fun conversation point. It's the idea of people can be conspiratorial. It's like we're going to conspire to create this vision of the future, to open up space, to solve pandemics or whatever it is. But if you're conspiring in a positive way, with a positive mindset, it's a benign conspiracy versus a negative conspiracy. And of course, Daniel is the creator of exponential medicine, which I had a small part to play in, but is I give you now, 98% of actually continuing it and making it real year after year. So anyway, great to see you, pal. And we are going to have a conversation, as every conversation going on right now, about pandemics and coronavirus. And I'd like to dig into the conversation around how different is this than the flu? How real is the level of fear? In 2020, I see this question: can we solve pandemics quicker? Can I just hit with an opening statement that we have two pandemics going on right now? We have a pandemic with the coronavirus and COVID-19. We have a pandemic of fear, and these are two parallel, independent pandemics going on, both of which need to be addressed. And if I look at the numbers, I was just communicating to my Abundance 360 family this morning. Here are the numbers. So we have China with a population of about 1.4 billion, 1.386 billion people in China, 4 times greater than the United States. China had about 3,300 deaths. It took care of the infection curve over the course of around 2 months. And today we have 1,000 deaths in the United States, roughly. And last year, the flu took somewhere between 35 and 57,000 deaths. So there's a huge amount of fear. And the question
Don't hear you. I got you back. Technology.
Yeah, there
now
we go.
I got you.
Okay. Yeah, no, I had an alarm go off in the middle of this. Yeah, technology. So how warranted is this massive level of fear, Daniel? And do we actually know what the mortality rate is? And could it be something that is overblown, or is it 100% the right reaction people are having?
I mean, of course, all these early comparisons to the flu, which had roughly 0.1% mortality rate, and depending on what population, what age group, what comorbidities.
We don't actually know that, right? Because we know the deaths from the flu, but we estimate infection rates. We don't actually have a true infection rate estimate for the flu.
Right, and also we don't have a good estimate rate for even the infection rates here. Most folks don't even have access to testing, even if you have you're a healthcare worker, unless you're a congressman or a basketball player. Not a lot of access right now. So we don't have really good numbers to base this on. But I think clearly, given that we've just seen anecdotally pretty young, relatively healthy people die, not just folks who have comorbidities in their 80s. This is a different animal, and we don't have innate immunity to it. And so I think there's a balance between fear. Fear can be a good thing. It takes action, and I think particularly it's been relatively successful here in California in terms of spreading out the curve, this whole stay-at-home movement. But I think it's relatively reasonable fear at this point. How we sort of balance that with the economy and response over time has to be sorted out. But I think this is, again, it's a novel coronavirus. We don't yet know all the data, and it's not always acting the same as it has in China.
So I'm going to play for our community here, right? I am in seclusion and isolation. I am concerned about family and friends who are ill, and I have a number of family friends who are on a ventilator. So I take this very serious. Don't take that, but I want to play the devil's advocate for a second here, because we do know that we're going to hit probably north of 10%, probably 20% unemployment, which is, what is that, with 330 million people in the country, that's like 60 million unemployed people. That's massive. And we're going to see hundreds of thousands of bankruptcies. So we're going to see a huge amount of people's nest eggs vaporize. We're going to see companies go out of business, people losing their jobs and such. And so how do we balance this? And while we don't know the mortality rate, because we don't know the population of people who are actually infected, it's like we're crushing the economy at the same time. One of the things that gives me hope, Daniel, and I know you appreciate this more than most, is this is the first time ever in human history we've seen a singular enemy of the entire 8 billion people on the planet. And we're, as a result of that singular enemy, seeing somewhere between 100 million and 200 million scientists, engineers, technicians, nurses, physicians, all attacking one single focus. Like we've been invaded by an alien species, and we're all fighting back because of that.
Yeah, it's been amazing to see the collaboration. I mean, it just feels like the whole of Brave New World just in the last 2 weeks. I mean, I was just on a Zoom call with like 40 people from at least 10 different countries collaborating on a single project. And it is bringing people together. I think we'll have PC pre-COVID and post-COVID era, and how we do everything from medicine to communicate to work to our economies to hopefully detecting and responding to pandemics is going to have a sea change shift. Even our friends at Tesla are now across the bay from me starting to build ventilators, and that's geared up very quickly. So I think there's going to be some great things and good things that come out of this, particularly through the benign conspiracies and networks that you've helped build. But back to your earlier piece, I'm not an economist, but if we were to say, hey, the economy is suffering, absolutely. People are suffering, people are losing their jobs. But if we release some of these measures right now, we will have more deaths by far, and that will tank the economy in a worse way later. So it's a really
And again, I'm raising the points, not making a recommendation.
Yeah.
One thing that I talk a lot about on exponentials, deceptive versus disruptive. Right, the deceptive phase early in the doublings, and it becomes disruptive. And we've seen that in viral infections where, there's just a few number of people infected and then it's doubling, right? For everybody watching us, double something 10 times, it's 1,000 times more. Double it 20 times, it's 1,000,000 times. Double it 30 times, it's 1,000,000,000 times. Those are deceptive numbers when you think about it. But the other thing that's deceptive is the flip side. And this is where I love your thoughts, Daniel, that it's deceptive about how many new antivirals and drug combinations and vaccine efforts and therapeutics, right? Because every country is working on this, and there are labs doing crazy experiments, probably with CRISPR and gene therapy and things in AI and data science, all coming in. And I think that what's going to be incredible is that I think while it's deceptive now, we're going to eventually have a tsunami of solutions against COVID-19.
Yeah, I mean, incredible innovation and platforms spilling up. We talked the other night to the folks at Scripps, where they're doing a robotic drug screening against COVID, or our folks like Alex Z with his company now doing, AI-based computational manufacturing of molecules and testing those and speeding up drug discovery. The challenge still is, as we know, things, even though they're accelerating to get a drug through clinical trials and into people's hands, even if it's a generic drug that may be approved, like chloroquine, which you're still sorting out, takes some time. Vaccines, and as we know, a couple from our friends at Moderna and Inovio have entered trials. We have to make sure that they're safe. There have been examples of vaccines like for dengue fever that end up causing a worse bite or having autoimmune disease elements. So it's a real challenge. Like, you can have 9 pregnant women still not make a baby in a month. So while there's some incredible exponential technologies and some things that are coming very rapidly, how do we move from exponential information to knowledge to then translating that to something you and I can take as a vaccine, or someone who's on a ventilator can leverage right now to get a quick fix?
Yeah. So I want to hit a few of these things, and then we'll head towards a lot of the great questions that are coming out right now. One of the things that's so important right now is your mindset. I would say that your mindset is one of the most critical tools that all of us have to battle what's going on. And so when you're watching the Crisis News Network, CNN, or whatever you call Fox, and constantly under bombarding of the stock markets around death rates, around these problems and unemployment rates and so forth, it is oppressing. And that can, in fact, impact your immune system incredibly well. If your stress levels are through the roof and you have your cortisol levels go up, that's like just beats down your immune system. And I've been sharing this information. One of the things that I have worked on for 2 years, we weren't ready to deploy it yet, but we have just deployed a special version of it called Future Loop. And if you go to futureloop.com/C19, it is a machine learning algorithm that searches the world's news for positive sentiment, exponential sentiments, abundant sentiments about converging technologies that are solving problems in the pandemic. So every day you see what's going on in AI and data science and CRISPR and gene therapy and drones and robots, in all of these things going on as they are addressing COVID-19 pandemic. So check it out, it's free. It's called futureloop.com/C19, and it's a way of keeping you in a positive mindset around these things. You're a real doctor. I went to medical school, got my diploma, hung it, ended up not practicing. You did practice. So let's talk about immune system, because while young people are getting the infection, the majority of deaths by orders of magnitude are in elderly. Yes?
Yes, though we're seeing some interesting data around younger folks who have been sadly passing away. Maybe folks who have, let's say, diabetes, even though they're relatively healthy, or other autoimmune diseases. Something with insulin may be playing a role. We're still learning who's going to have an immune response, or is that immune response going to be maintained? Could you get exposed to a mild or severe case, and then let's see your clinician go back into the lines? But riffing back on your point earlier about Crisis News Network and news pulling you down, I think there's a healthy level of stress, so we respond appropriately. But I think this is an amazing, crisis. What's that Chinese? It's also opportunity.
Yes.
To find projects to dive into. Some of us get to play a role in connecting the dots through things like X Prize, or building new applications, or helping connect dots for clinicians, or making new protective equipment. So anyone can kind of help with their stress by volunteering in some form, whether it's helping collect data, deliver food to a neighbor. So I think there's adaptive elements to our stress, which will help our immune systems be more resilient as well.
So when I think about gearing up your immune system and resiliency, I would say it's still the basics. It's sleep. I am trying to get at least 7 hours of sleep. I'm shooting for 8 hours of sleep. And let me say one other thing, that as we're in solitude or seclusion or quarantine, whatever you want to call it, for 30 days, 60 days, 90 days, that's enough time to create a new habit. And I think that's fascinating. And so what habits do you want to proactively create during this period of time? And I would posit better sleep, exercise. So I'm doing something, it's not intense exercise. I'm doing a 7-minute workout every morning. I use an app from Johnson & Johnson called 7-Minute Workout, and it's free. How are you exercising, Daniel?
Sadly, my Fitbit data, which I track, my Fitbit, it showed me it says, Daniel, your average steps used to be like 12,000. You're down to 2,000 a day.
Yes.
Ooh, I'm sitting here not moving around. So one of my actions is to get up and moving and take a walk with my kids down the streets, and I stay for change. Yeah. 2, trying to get my sleep in, which I usually am behind on. And 3, try and get my mindfulness practice, use my Headspace app. So those are like simple things that definitely help your immune system. And interestingly on this, in terms of like wearables that can track your sleep and your activity, it's been postulated for a while. I had this hypothesis. Now there are trials. Could your Fitbit determine if you're getting the flu or COVID? There's now some open source data projects where you can connect your Apple Health Get data and others. Are we going to start to learn that your resting heart rate's going up? Temperature obviously might change. There might be early clues, not just for COVID, but for standard flu and others that can give us these new insights to be more proactive. And if you need to take Tamiflu or some antiviral, hopefully that'll be available.
No, absolutely. So, and then the other thing, you can develop a habit. So it's sleep, it's exercise, it's meditation are great 3 things to start. And the other is your diet. How has your diet been? Is it time now to try going towards a vegan diet or a low salt diet, or at a minimum, what I've been doing here is really focusing on a intermittent fast where I have dinner at 7 and then I don't eat again till lunch the next day. Lots of data about that.
Yeah, well, both of us travel a lot normally, and so this has been an interesting time to have a bit of a reset. I tend to skip breakfast now. I've got little kids, they still want mac and cheese. We're lucky to still get our sort of gobble home delivery, so that makes meals a little more healthy and easy to do before we go through our cans of spaghetti and pasta sauce. But it is a great time to, as you mentioned, kind of think what are the kind of core fundamentals you want to practice, and this is the time to reset your habit structure. So obviously food's the #1 drug, as we've talked about at Exponential Medicine and other settings. You know, there's a really interesting era there. It's not just one size fits all diet. Some folks might do better with high carb, low fat, different forms based on your microbiome, your metabolome. And so I think it's an interesting time just even to get the basics right. You don't need a fancy special diet. So here's an opportunity.
Let's get some of the questions here. Let's talk about testing, vaccines, and therapeutics. So first of all, for folks, there are 2 kinds of tests. There's a PCR test, which detects, do you have the virus in your sinus, in your nasal passage? And there's a blood antibody test, which has your immune system seen the virus and have you developed some level of immunity to it, which means you have an exposure to it. Dan, you want to talk about both a little bit?
Yeah, again, as you mentioned, the PCR test, which requires relatively sophisticated machinery to look for actually the RNA itself, expand it, find and sense it, because there's relatively small amounts of molecules there at the beginning, plays a role in saying, do you have it or not? Those tests are not always completely accurate. There's people who are maybe positive or testing negative and vice versa. So we have to be mindful of that. The more interesting part downstream was, are you developing the immunoglobulin that starts with IgM and then IgG, the longer term immunity? And can we start to understand, does that really protect you for long periods of time? If COVID comes back around the world next year, will you be protected? Do you need a vaccination? There is one of our exponential medicine colleagues, Jack Kreinler, leading up a project called COV-Clear, cov-clear.com, where you can enter, crowdsource your data. Have you been tested? Are you positive? Have you got an antibody test? We have to start building these maps so we understand that at scale. Another one of our faculty out of Harvard, Jonathan Brownstein, has started COVID Near You, where you can also crowdsource, have you been tested? Are you symptomatic? What symptoms have you had? So we'll start to correlate in some degree the analytics of testing with symptoms, and at some point we might not even have to do the physical test. I've postulated our digital exhaust or a cough. Could you measure with AI your cough on your smartphone? Does that have a COVID type sound?
Yeah, I love that idea, right? Because a lung infection from a coronavirus causing COVID-19 is much more abusive on your lungs and probably does sound different, and you probably can get a sound profile. Someone that you know well, some of my closest friends on the planet, Lou Reese and Mei Hugh, we just started a new company together. It's called Kovax, C-O-V-A-X-X. The website just went up today. So their parent company, United Biomedical, is one of the largest viral test companies and vaccine companies on the world out of Taiwan and China. And they have vaccinated some 5 billion pigs for foot and mouth, and they did the early SARS test. So they have built out antibody testing. And the first thing they did, they live in Telluride, and they went door to door and took blood from 8,000 people in San Miguel County. And they're now sending those tests, and they're in discussions with cities and governors and large corporations to do large scale testing where someone wants to order 10,000 tests at a time. It's not set up for small tests yet. They're in discussions with all the major labs, so it can be. But the idea is, can you test a large population and then clear them so that people can go about their business without having fear? Because fear is the mind killer that's really destroying so much of us. So super excited. And you can learn more about it at covax.com is the website for Kovax.
I think that's incredibly important. And also now we're starting to see some really interesting innovation in home-based tests. Could you basically have a very cheap home-based version that you can do, on your smartphone? Or there's several examples. I've got my old iPhone 2 here, but a company called Johnacare makes these little home-based diagnostics, not right now for COVID, but imagine for the next pandemic, you have everyone's home or everyone's community has some mobile type devices that you could really program to pick up the virus of the week or of the year and give you real-time analytics. Jonathan Rothberg invented several diagnostic platforms, including mobile ultrasounds that are for a couple $1,000 with AI. Now as a home-based test they're developing, they're collaborating hopefully with folks at Healthy.io that can use your smartphone as a diagnostic as well to read the signal. So lots of interesting creativity coming there. We want to think downstream to our next pandemics. Can we have ways of really picking up the molecular signal and almost programming your phone to analyze for those?
Can I hit that point? That's a really important point. And when I think about the upside of this pandemic, the positive outcomes, and that's one of the questions here as well, I think this could be so much worse as a pandemic, right? Right now, this is very transmissible and asymptomatic, and that's really bad. But the mortality rate for this could be 20, 30, 40%. It could be something more like SARS or Ebola, in which case, people today treat it as if it's a death sentence if it's coming near them. It's not a death sentence, and the vast majority of people will recover fine, but it could be. And so I think of this almost as a practice pandemic. And it's uncovering all of the weak points in our healthcare system, our reporting systems, our economic systems, our governance systems. And so as a practice pandemic, and I don't want to minimize the impact this is having in any way, shape, or form, but it could be a lot worse. And hopefully we will learn our lesson and be ready the next time. Maybe instead of just an Air Force and a Space Force, we'll have a Bioforce. That was an idea I heard from David Sinclair.
Yeah, bingo. We had our friend Larry Brilliant on the other day on this BOMA summit, who's seen a lot of pandemics. He helped eradicate smallpox. And there's a lot of lessons we're going to learn, hopefully, moving forward to be much more proactive. There's a lot of opportunity to learn. We've had a lot of missteps, particularly here in the United States. And the hope is that we'll have a very rapid response force that can roll out testing and roll out vaccines and drugs in a newer, faster way, which will not just benefit viral elements, but many diseases. Telemedicine's being shifted. So the US government released the HIPAA requirements. So you and I can bring a medical visit without being fined for HIPAA violations. Technologies like we both were involved in the X Prize, tricorder competition. These technologies are going to start embedding, and we'll start having more not just virtual visits, but ones that are embedded with data. So you'll see the patient's vitals from their smartphone, their wearables, and all these things are being unleashed. You know, we need to relax some of these regulations, not too far, but it's going to catalyze new things in a good way.
Let me answer a couple of questions coming through, which is, did you both get the flu vaccine? And the answer is yes, absolutely. My kids, my entire family. And, you know, I've been doing a number of these Instagram lives, and it's interesting how when I say, and I'm going to say it again, because I truly believe it in all my heart, that getting vaccinated is one of the most important things that you can do, that it is science, and that it saves countless lives. And is there the potential for damage if you're getting a whole slew of vaccines at the same time, if you're a healthcare worker? Perhaps, but for the general population, I personally think that 100% of the population should be receiving the flu vaccine. It is hardcore science. Daniel, you want to add to that?
I mean, I'm trained in pediatrics as well. I mean, vaccinations are very well proven, are safe. I know there's the anti-vax movement out there, which has in fact been quite damaging. We're seeing the advent of measles pop up as one example. And I think if nothing else comes out of this, public health workers and epidemiology will become the new sexy science, maybe supplanting data science, and realizing that, you know, we have all these amazing technologies from potentially 3D printing organs and CRISPR, but the number one benefit to our health and our longevity and our increasing health span has been public health, clean water and vaccines. I don't think many of us would want to be in the healthcare situation we were in 1918 when the Spanish flu came through and killed millions and millions. Penicillin wasn't invented. Most pediatric diseases were often a death sentence. It wasn't, our parents were in the generation of polio, and that was eradicated by the polio vaccine. So we have to be very thankful and mindful of the vaccine movement. It's a very important point.
Let me go through and we'll do a rapid fire answer some of these questions. There are some important misinformation we need to dismiss here. So first of all, in 2020, can we solve pandemics quicker? And I will say that we are gearing up the entire healthcare system, that we are going to be able to get to a vaccine quicker, to get to antivirals quicker. We're going to start to see AI and data science play a big role. Quantum computers, not yet, but in the next 3-4 years, I think even quantum computers will help play a role in this.
One example, our friend Craig Venter used to talk about faxing over vaccines. Example, China, they sequenced the early versions of COVID. Our friends in San Diego at Inovio Biosciences got the sequence in 3 hours. They figured out what the antigens were, turned those into DNA plasmids, which are now going through clinical trials. So we may have an advent in 2020, or let's say 2025, where literally we might be able to make a vaccine super quickly. It's already validated through a pathway. The work that RNA vaccines that's being done out of Boston may become a very rapid new pathway.
Here's an important question that I really want to squelch, which is it true that 5G is guilty for coronavirus? And the answer is 1,000,000,000,000% it is not the cause of coronavirus. Please help us put that to rest. It might be coincident that 5G came out at the same time, but believe me, it is not. We've seen mutations we've seen viral transfer from animals to humans over and over through history. 5G has nothing to do with this. All right, how much of the exponential growth is hospital spread patient to patient or to healthcare workers? Daniel, what do you think?
Well, there's a huge concern, obviously, around healthcare workers getting this being taken out of service, but also folks who are not that sick coming into clinics or overwhelming emergency rooms and then catching it from folks in the waiting areas. So I think we're seeing some smart new triage elements. If you do have relatively mild symptoms, talking to your clinician on the phone or doing a telehealth visit. Several of the big insurance companies now are offering free telehealth consults and can help guide when and where you get tested. Ideally, that's a drive-through setting, so you're not exposing yourself or others if you may be infected or around others. So clearly, healthcare, I mean, New York right now is looking pretty horrible. The emergency rooms there are getting overwhelmed, and I'm concerned about our healthcare workers who don't have enough PPE or soon won't, because on the exponential, you use 40,000 masks one day in New York and 80,000 the next. We're soon going to be out. So a lot of concern about how do we distribute the care. In London now, they're trying to roll out big hospital settings. Ships are being used. We have a lot of creativity about how to be protective.
Yeah, there's a question about what are the business opportunities coming out of coronavirus, out of COVID-19? And so as part of my Abundance Digital community, I spend time talking about this and thinking about this. What I say is when you see a problem, flip it as an opportunity. So what you should be looking for is in your daily lives, where are you running into problems? Where are you running into issues? Where are you seeing challenges? And then think, how can I solve that? It's an important mindset trick, but it's like, that's a great place to go. I'm a teacher in Australia studying innovation at MIT. Would love advice on what I can do from home or work. Not sure I have a specific answer there, other than really, I think one of the things that's going to be important is helping people digitize their business. I talk about the 6 Ds of exponentials. Whatever you digitize, enter slow, deceptive growth and deceptive and disruptive growth. It dematerializes, demonetizes, democratizes products and services. So how can you help people digitize stuff?
To that question, I would answer, this is an incredible time to study innovation. There's a ton of innovation happening at an accelerating rate. So what's working? How are folks coming together? Is it just through Zoom? What other platforms can help people, learn, collaborate, and execute in a virtualized manner? And what's that going to mean for the post-COVID era?
Yeah. How different is the world going to be after this? And what does after this actually mean? Is it another part of that question? Is this going to go away in a few months? Is it going to take 18 months? Is it only after there's a vaccine? Thoughts?
I think I'm worried, I heard Tony Fauci talk about this yesterday, that they're seeing in Africa, which is turning into their winter there, that they're seeing cases there. So let's say we flatten the curve over here, but it pops up in Africa, and then it comes back around the world next year. The Spanish flu in 1918 went around the world like 4 times. That was before we had jet travel. So I think there are concerns we may really need to wait until we have a vaccine before we really get folks together into our real post-COVID world. The also challenges is COVID going to be mutating in some forms? Will there be different strains, just like the annual flu? So still a lot of unknowns.
A lot of questions about that. And so let's talk about vaccines for a second. I'll continue to flow down the questions here. So there's probably, I don't know, 20 or 30, maybe there's 100, maybe there's 1,000 vaccine efforts underway. I would imagine that there are many vaccine efforts going on in China, in Israel, throughout Europe, and every major company. I know COVAX, the company I mentioned that's doing the testing, is also the largest. They've got a vaccine platform, and they vaccinate against a whole slew of different viruses in animal health. They've got a multi-billion-dollar public company on that, and they're developing a vaccine. It's in animals right now. It will go into humans 30 days from now. So the question is the FDA timeline. So I was talking to the CEO of one of the major companies, and he said he doesn't expect a vaccine to be approved until fall of 2021. So here's a question. Might we see a vaccine come out in Israel or China quicker because of their approval process, and then people flying there to get vaccinated, or the testing there demonstrating safety? What do you think?
I think we may. I know the FDA is working to figure out how to, the idea for the FDA is to do things that are drugs and vaccines that are safe and effective, right? So we need both. And safety often takes a bit longer than we maybe want in the situation. So what's the trade-off between getting something in faster? And just for folks who are not immunologists there, the kind of usual vaccination is you have, let's say, a virus and you make it inactive, or you find the proteins that are the ones that stimulate the immune system and you put them in the body in some way to trigger that immune response so that when the disease shows up, you don't respond. The challenge is our immune systems are complex. Sometimes those antigens might look like something on our beta islet cells that make insulin and turn someone into a diabetic or attack our joints. So there's sort of a double-edged sword with the immune system. The trick is to learn how to tune it. I think through this and other initiatives, we're going to learn how to tune our immune systems better and faster. But yes, there may be situations where the regulatory systems are laxer. You may see a vaccine. May there be some downstream effects that might see 2 or 3 years to show up? We don't know. And what that trade-off is a big question.
Yeah, and the timeline I said was not fall of 2020, which would be in 3 or 4 months. We're talking about the fall of 2021, right? So it'll be interesting. Next question was, hey, Peter, what's the deal with the prayer beads you're wearing? So I'm not wearing any prayer beads. This is just a jacket. I could grab, some serious beads if you guys want. some beads, but I'll take these off for now.
I'm
All
wearing
right,
my intent. I'm wearing my intent bracelet from our friend, and mine is actualize. Actualize. So I think this is the time for people to actualize their initiatives and their energy and their creativity and their human connection. I think a big piece, and I think it's been said before, about social isolation or distancing. We need physical distancing, but not social. We're all now connecting in new ways, and the mental health component of this is serious, not just from getting overwhelmed by bad news, but how we
fear, depression, anger, all of these things. There's a question here: will the 17 SDGs keep us to the next pandemic? What's going to keep us to the next pandemic is the fact that companies and healthcare systems and governments should wake up and never have this happen again. I mean, we knew this was going to happen. It was not a matter of if, it was a matter of when, but yet we did not. So one of the things, for example, is what are the other global existential risks that are going to happen that we're not prepared for? I can think of one that you and I talk about. It's asteroid impacts, right? Someday there will be an asteroid pummeling towards the Earth, and it's going to make this pandemic look like a sunny day in Santa Monica. So we're not ready for that. And so even for this year, X Prize has its big Visioneering event every October. And 6 months ago, before this came out, we set as an objective our mission to address humanity's existential threats. We had on the list pandemics, asteroids, nuclear bombs, hate and terrorism, and environmental impact. Anyway,
yeah,
serious stuff.
And the good lesson with asteroids, you can't say, oh, one's coming, let's hurry up and build an asteroid catcher. I mean, you need to be proactive and think about it and strategize, just like we do with here in the United States. And not to get political, but we had some things set up, before this administration that were pandemic response forces that essentially were dissolved. So, and sometimes it's not sexy and it's expensive, but you can see that the cost of not being ready, the cost of not having enough tests available is massive.
How long before this thing, quote, blows over? How long before you or I are ready to get on an airplane and fly someplace? What are you thinking? So China, we saw between mid-January and mid-March this peak, and then 0 new infections per day, roughly, over the last couple of weeks. What are your thoughts about, I live in Santa Monica, you live up in the Bay Area. We have people from around the world. I saw Pakistan, so it's not just US-centric, but what are you thinking? What's your thought right now, pal?
I mean, I think we have to look at the hard data and learn and adapt. It's not like we can say, oh, we'll be open by Easter just because we'd like to be. And there's some concern that, and this even happened in Singapore. They had a pretty good response. The curve came down. They went to 0 cases. And then a couple of folks came in from other places and reinfected. And we don't have to go through all this work of social, physical distancing and then have to do it again before we have a vaccine or an effective drug. So,
or until we have a level of herd immunity. Can you explain what herd immunity is, doctor?
Yeah. Essentially, when enough folks have had the disease that they're immune, the ability to pass it along to others, there's enough in the herd who are protected or have had it in some form, vaccinated, or by the actual disease that it gets transmitted at a much slower rate or not at all. So that's sort of the high level. But, we need to be paying attention to folks like Anthony Fauci. The epidemiological modelers have been quite accurate. You can look at these curves every day online. And we live in this exponential age, but as Peter, as you mentioned earlier, it's deceptive. We're at 1,000 deaths today in the United States. A month ago, we had 0, and 3 weeks ago we had 1. So are we going to have 2,000 in a week and then 4? We have to be very mindful, look at the data, and encourage some parts of the country that are not yet taking this as seriously, or some particularly younger folks, to really be on top of this.
Question here about how do I intern with you, Peter? I do take a couple of internships. I announce them through my blog. If you're getting my blog, if you're not, you can go to diamandis.com and you can sign up for the blog there. I spend a lot of time in my Abundance Digital community. It's around 2,500 entrepreneurs around the world. And so I am mentoring them and working with them through the Abundance Digital app. You can go to abundance.digital to get more information about that. And how, as a teacher, do we stay safe ourselves while working with kids? Schools are still open here in Australia. Wow. So is it, I mean, does it become, you know, I was laughing at people early on who were wearing masks and gloves. I'm not laughing now. Does that become something that is just routine? We wear masks and gloves in places where people are still working.
Well, maybe we're going to have, clearly, you know, one of the early screens at airports used to be temperature. And it seems like some folks can be asymptomatic or early on the course without a clear fever, for example. So hopefully we'll have, you know, literally, you know, a 20-second home-based test or something. And when someone comes to school every week, you can kind of get screened. If that becomes that sort of norm, we'll get very rapid assessments if we may be actually a carrier, even if they're asymptomatic. There's other data from our friends in the GI world that it may be spread also by stool, right? So, and again, from folks who are not just coughing and sneezing, there would be other spread routes. So again, we're still learning about this. I think for the school folks in Australia, I think my 3- and 5-year-olds know about washing their hands and coughing their elbows. So certain social norms may come into place. Namaste instead of shaking hands for a while. All those things can play a role in places that are not yet closing schools.
Yeah, no, I agree. And so we're going to have to, there's going to be changes in social behavior. Events like this change the future, and they change social behavior. And it may well be that for a period of time, we're not shaking hands, we're wearing masks, we are wearing gloves and things like that. Why is the FDA not approving all INDs, which is investigational new drug approvals? And it's interesting, right? So another company that I'm proud to be co-founder of with Bob Huri, we did a Instagram Live with Bob a couple of days ago. Daniel, you know him, he's on your faculty for teaching at SU in exponential medicine, has created the largest population of natural killer cells derived from stem cells. And ultimately, those natural killer cells have the ability to augment the immune system. And we have filed for IND on that. But what about, how do you feel about IND approvals?
Well, I think if you go to clinicaltrials.gov right now, you can actually see almost all the trials that have been approved and are pending or about to happen. So for folks who are looking for trials or to see the pace of those, you can go to clinicaltrials.gov. I think a lot of new drugs are moving in. I don't know if the FDA is trying to hold that back. There may be a laxation of the timing and the regulatory path is constrained. The CDC has relaxed what might be an effective mask. So there's lots of changes happening in the regulatory level. Some of them are going to be smart, some are going to be not so smart, some are going to be reactive. But a lot of these drugs, we now need to get them to the folks who need them because just because chloroquine may have worked or seemed to have worked in a small, non-randomized trial doesn't mean it's going to work for many folks. We need to be very smart and quick about how we do trials.
So again, one of the things that gives me hope is that we've the entire scientific and medical world focusing on this, and that's extraordinary. And while there are official clinical trials going on, I think you would agree that there are, if not tens of thousands, at least thousands of unofficial trials going on, where hospitals and physicians and scientists are trying all kinds of combinations of drugs that are already in production, or cellular medicines or other areas. And so I think, and the level of communication is massive, right? We're seeing a huge amount of information coming from China to the US to the rest of the world. So again, that's why I feel it's deceptive, the amount of solutions, how quickly things are going to change.
One of the things I've been seeing interesting among my clinician community is now starting to share best practices. Some have been sort of published from China. I just saw the sort of best practices from Brigham and Women's. It's trying to crowdsource and learn, you know, what's been learned in Italy and China is now being applied in New York City. So how do you wean a ventilator or put someone on it? How do you best intubate? Hospital systems are sharing their knowledge about what's the best processes for triage. So there's a lot of rapid learning coming, and the trick now is to connect the dots. I like to think about it, you know, how do we almost create a Google Maps or a Waze for COVID so you can see the map of what's around you, what's locally available to you, where's the testing site down the street, which hospital has a waiting room that's full versus empty, based on yourself and your comorbidities, what is your risk factors and what symptoms might be relevant to you. So I think one thing that can come out of all of this as well is better sort of situational awareness for an individual, for a city, for a town, for the planet, so that we can rapidly respond and learn in real time.
You know, the book I just put out, and it's not a promo for the book, but what's called the future is faster than you think. And I look at how robots and drones and AI and AR and VR and all these converging exponentials are going to transform every industry out there, healthcare, entertainment, education and such. And what I'm seeing is that all the predictions made in the book are being massively accelerated by this pandemic, right? The future is, much faster than we think. I should have probably renamed the book. And it's interesting, I was thinking about the forces that cause Darwinian evolution, right? So Darwin said, when you have three things occurring, small population sets, geographic isolation, and high evolutionary pressures, that causes genetic drift and speciation that occurs. And so we're seeing all three of those things occurring now. And so I think we're going to see a lot of technological and business model speciation coming out soon.
Yeah, I'm not sure to say it was the idea of like ideas having sex and ideas evolving and the ones that are surviving proliferating. So, again, how do we learn quickly to manufacture a new vent system? Not just the fact that you might need new ventilators. One question I'd have for you, Peter, is like, how do we think about upskilling, a standard nurse or a dermatologist to learn how to remember how to use a ventilator? I mean, just because you have a ventilator and you have someone who needs it, it's a whole other can of worms to understand how to put someone on it, the right settings, how to wean someone off. We almost need this whole AI and medicine come together faster.
Yeah, we had a sprint for the last week about a ventilator XPRIZE. And then when we looked at it, there are so many DIY 3D printed ventilators projects going on out there that we said, we don't need an XPRIZE for this. It's happening without us. And so we're focusing on an XPRIZE around upskilling, in part for people who have lost their jobs. But I agree, how do we make people who have lost their jobs part of the healthcare system if we need healthcare workers in that regard, or even phlebotomists, right, to be able to go and take the bloods. Iceland just did a sort of nationwide testing program. Have you heard any results from that?
I don't know about the Iceland plan. I think one thing that might come out of this is each community and country is going to have a much more on top of it plan, and we're going to have been through this, hopefully, practice pandemic in a sense so that we can respond better next time. But tell me about it. I'm not sure.
Well, no, I just, there's a question that says, did you read about the Iceland testing case that of half of the cases are no signals, nothing? I assume means no symptoms. So one of the things that's interesting is when we talk about how dangerous this is, we talk about what is the mortality rate. But honestly, we don't know. We can easily measure people who are dead, unfortunately, but we have no idea what the denominator of the equation is. And even in the flu pandemic, we estimate the number of people with the flu. We don't actually know the number of people who have the flu. And so here's another part of the question, or another question says, is it a matter of having a stronger immune system? If you have the virus, there's no cure. So let me mention something. Our immune system, our natural killer cells and our T cells, are constantly battling both cancers and viruses in your body. So if you have cytomegalovirus or herpes or Epstein-Barr virus, those viruses are in your body. They don't go away. You don't destroy them and kill them. Even smallpox, right, which comes back as shingles. And your immune system is always fighting them back. They might emerge to the point where you have an infection, a herpes canker sore, or shingles as an adult, and your immune system fights it back. And you're always creating cancers in your body. This is a part of life, and your immune system finds it and destroys it. It's only when your immune system is unable to cope with it that you get a reinfection or a cancer develops. So there's a concept. I was talking with Stefan Bansal, a mutual friend, the CEO of Moderna, and his chief scientist, and talking about the idea that there's something called immune system exhaustion, where you can exhaust your immune cells, where they're overloaded and you're not able to fight back all of the multi-front wars. And that's the thing to be concerned about. And that's where supplementing your immune system from companies like Singularity are coming in.
but there's a double-edged sword. So we know that many of the folks who are unfortunately dying, it's from respiratory failure. Part of that is your immune system creating this sort of cytokine storm, which is causing inflammation in the lungs. And so there are even some drugs, older drugs, being used in cancer immunotherapy and beyond to hopefully tamp down part of the immune system. Some anti-IL-6, I believe, is one. So there may be sort of this, how do we tune the immune system to appropriately respond but not over-respond? Just like folks who have autoimmune disease, it's an overactive immune system.
Yeah. A lot of questions coming in here. All right. So similar to when you do a security screening for computers or a physical building, and after a test break, can you see the faults and fix them? What should we be looking for in this pandemic? So honestly, every pandemic is going to be different. And one of the things that's interesting is, can we use exponential technologies for screening the air handling systems, screening the toilet, so that in airports around the world, let's assume we're more concerned if these things are getting out, that we have genomic RNA and DNA sequencers on every air filter and every toilet, every urinal, and all over the place, right? So it's literally looking for, and it says, okay, we've seen this virus, we've seen this virus. Oh, this is a new virus. It goes out to the World Health Organization. It gets transmitted around the world at the speed of light, and vaccines and antivirals are being created, 60 seconds later for that new virus, or whatever the case might be. I'm exaggerating here, but that's the future we're heading for in part.
Yeah, we're getting to super low-cost sequencing. You can imagine, sequencing air samples, sewage, et cetera, to pick up new pathogens early. And it doesn't always have to be the sequencing level. There are several groups, even the group that may have picked the signal up from this in China based on social media reports, or who's searching for cough medicine or flu medicines. There's all these new sort of biomarkers, right, that always aren't biologic, but they can be information ones. So you can hotspot these maps and respond early before spread happens.
Yeah, Google Flu Alert, whatever it was called, right?
Flu trends, yep.
Google Flu Trends. Yeah, when people were Googling for cough medicine, Google knew that and was able to screen for that. I mean, here's some, so let me just, one important question here. It says, when you say T cells, do you mean testosterone? So please talk about T cells and natural killer cells and their functions, Dr. Kraft.
So there are two types of you have white blood cells, which are classically involved in helping with your immunity. B cells are the forms of cells that make antibodies. Antibodies are the ones that confer often long-term protection and make antibodies that you've already had the flu shot, you've made antibodies, you've had your measles vaccine, you have antibodies that have been produced. And if you are exposed to measles, let's say, your immune system can very rapidly spool up those cells and they'll make a whole manufacturing chain of those antibodies that already exist. So that's a key part of the immune system. Then there's the T cells, which will have a T cell receptor and will find an infected cell and go after it and kill it. And that's an important component of the immune system as well. Both together are super important in fighting viral infections and for long-term immunity. So folks who have a relatively immunosuppression, while we hear about someone who may have, let's say, diabetes or had a heart or lung transplant or autoimmune disease where they're taking steroids or other suppressants, their T cells and B cells are relatively suppressed, so they're going to have a much easier time getting infected and a much harder time responding with their immune system to fight off COVID.
One of the things that Dr. Brilliant said, and Dr. Brilliant headed google.org. He was part of Jeff Skoll's sort of amazing nonprofit. And he said something that I think is really important to hear. It says, why are we seeing more pandemics now than ever before? And it also may be the impact of humanity. That we are cutting down more and more forests. We're deforesting at a much larger level, and the animals in nature don't have a place to live, and they're coming out more into society, and we're seeing more human-animal interactions, whether they're bites or whether they're food. The other thing is that we're raising the global temperature on the average, and so the two of those things may be part of the reason we're seeing more and more pandemics. And again, more of a reason, if we need another reason, to be environmentally and societally conscious in that level.
One of the theories about how this sort of happened in Wuhan, particularly maybe out of this sort of wet market where they had bats that they eat and ferrets and chickens and everything together mixed up, combining their viral loads may have enabled this to jump from bats to something else, to something that was eaten and went out into the wild, into humans. So it's often part of our food supply chain and how that's happening and where it's happening that might catalyze this as well.
So last question to answer, and I'd love to do a 2-minute wrap up for each of us about X Prize. X Prize is looking at a series of prizes. We are just announced a partnership with Anthem to do a massive data science X Prize around this. We're working on an upskilling X Prize. We're always looking for X Prize ideas. Go to xprize.org to get more information. Daniel, you've been involved in a lot of global summits to pass information. How about a minute summary on key points from you, and I'll do the same, and we'll try and wrap within the 60 minutes.
Sure. So I think, as we've kind of touched on here, I mean, this whole pandemic is a crisis, and we need new mindsets and new technologies to come together. This convergence, the super convergence of AI and to 3D printing for ventilators, to big data, to nanotech, to drug discovery. All these things are really important, particularly as we combine them and now bring that future faster than we think. There's some amazing examples happening on prevention, using big data and mapping to see where the infections are, on diagnostics, moving from expensive rare tests to ones that will be in our pockets and based on our phones, to therapies, which may be repurposing old drugs, to discovering new ones and getting them through clinical trials faster, to then hopefully leveraging these technologies in new ways to detect and prevent future pandemics. So a lot of, I think, combinations of people from different worlds coming together that are really catalyzing new solutions, which will change our we need to think now, what does our post-COVID world look like? And how do we might even set that up now? Just like in the early 1940s, in the middle of World War II, or even in early World War II, organizations were thinking about what's the world going to look like next and how do we make it better. So I'm generally an optimist. I think some good things will come out. I still am a realist, and I think we're in for a very difficult couple of next weeks and maybe even months and potentially longer. So we need to kind of keep our heads on, take care of ourselves and others. And since we're both space geeks, I'll just share, I love this analogy that was shared by Gretchen Smeltzer about remembering what happened with Apollo 13 and our friend Gene Kranz, who, when he was told this might be the worst disaster during Apollo 13 for NASA, he responded, "With all due respect, I believe this is going to be our finest hour." And so the takeaway is that, this can be our finest hour. We can turn it from sort of let go of the we, embrace the I, and that if we all sort of come together, the global response to this pandemic and crisis, hopefully be one of the finest hours for our whole planet.
Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Daniel Kraft, a pleasure to have you all. Daniel, thank you so much, buddy. Take care, everybody.
Thanks for being here.
Bye now.